On the topic of Pilegesh Bagiva, in case anybody was inspired to go find a concubine, the institution no longer exists, right? Let's just be clear about this. I do remember a few cases in which people have actually asked me about this. The answer is no.
Okay.
The answer is
Like what? Can we have a concubine?
Having more than one wife is one thing. There's not only a biblical precedent for it, but there actually are halachot concerning it. The Sephardim never accepted the Cherem D'Rabbanan Geroshom, but the Sephardim didn't have pilakshim. You don't find anywhere, not even in Teiman, that they didn't have concubines. The question is, what's the status of this kind of relationship today? In other words, if this is no longer halachically permissible, when did that start? Because it doesn't seem this way. Abraham had a pilagish by the name of Hagar. He never married her. She was a pilagish. He had more pilagshim afterwards too. After she passed away, or she did teshuvah. But after Sarah passed away, we're told that he gave a certain inheritance to the sons of the pilagshim. So apparently there were other pilagshim in the story. We don't find the same by Yitzchak or by Yaakov. Yaakov had 4 wives, but maybe the status of the shvachot was a little bit different. So I'll preface this discussion with an interesting movement. I believe it started in Lakewood about maybe 15, 20 years ago. There was an organization that called itself the Shlom Bayit organization, which basically trying to revive the concept of concubinage, basically trying to bring back from the dead and buried, this concept. Tell you that the motivations were unclear might not be so true, because maybe there were better motivations there. I don't want to assume that they were doing the right thing, because they weren't, and it didn't last very long. But the point was that they were trying to make the claim that there was some sort of legitimate halachic grounds for a man having relations with a woman who's not his wife. Why would a man want to do that? So, not a politician. So the discussion is a very interesting one. David HaMelech made a takana, so it's effectively midrabanan. In other words, it doesn't appear in the Torah. After the catastrophe that was Amnon and Tamar, right, 2 of his children but from different mothers, where Amnon effectively he played like he was depressed, so he made himself as if he was sick, and he seduced his sister. He said she was the only one that he wanted to serve him food or drink while he was sick. And then when she was alone in the room, he locked the door, he molested her and humiliated her, and then he hated her and wanted nothing to do with her. It was a terrible disaster. At this point, David HaMelech makes a takana. What's the famous takana? Yichud. It's a sur for a man and a woman to be secluded together. It's called Yichud. What's Yichud? A man and a woman who are not permitted to be together, i.e. they're not husband and wife, not allowed to be in a room, secluded alone, right? So who you're permitted to marry, who you're not permitted to marry. We don't hold this applies to a father and daughter, although, Rahman al-Islam, every so often you hear of a crazy situation. But it's very unnatural. It's certainly an aberration, not something that anybody considers like a permanent threat, because parents have children, and we don't have this concern most of the time. So father, mother, son, daughter, grandparents and grandchildren, the minhag is not to be restricted.
So brother, sister?
Yeah, brother and sister. So ironically, even brother and sister were not mahmurim, except they shouldn't sleep in the same bed. There's certain things you should be careful about in general.
Adopted?
Adoption is a fascinating question. There are 2 questions about adoption. Really, it's the question, how do you define it? Why is it that a father is ne'eman when it comes to yichud with his daughter, or a mother is ne'eman to be with her son alone in the same house? Is it because they're genetically related, and naturally you're not so attracted to your brother or sister, normally? So if that's the case, then if we don't share the same genes, it should be asur, because this inhibition doesn't exist. If it's because a father or mother, they change the diapers, they see the kids when they're young and incontinent, I don't know, it's not like an especially appealing stage in life. So you kind of never really develop this kind of sexual attraction to kids that you raised in your house. And if that's the case, maybe adoption, at least when the kids are young, should count for the same thing, because I raised her since she was very young, so why should it be a concern? This boy's been in my house since he was 2 years old or whatever. Interesting discussion. It just doesn't appear in the Gemara. You had people who raised orphans, but it doesn't sound like they were doing it in a situation of yichud. If they had other kids the same age, maybe they'd bring them into the house. Very interesting. In fact, today most foster parents, like adoptive parents. They usually try to find parents who don't have other kids. And their understanding is that they'll be able to give the kids more attention. Probably it's the opposite. If you have other children, they'll have a little bit more interaction. They'll be like closer in age to actually real brothers and sisters. But neither here nor there. So there are those who say it's from the time that David Melech made this takana against Yehud that it's asur for a man and a woman to live together as man and concubine. Why? Because unless she's his wife, there's no exemption from this isur, which is basically that David Melech did this and he made it illegal. The Ramban happens to hold, which is really interesting, because if you look past Sefer Shoftim, you don't really find too many other examples. I mean, Shlomo Melech, maybe Sefer Malachim. And then it was wrong, and he was punished for it because he had so many concubines. But he didn't live with them. But it was a very weird story. We'll talk about that when we get to it. So according to the Ramban, what the nail in the coffin of concubinage was when Chazal made a takana, or probably just Anshe Knesset Agdola, the generation of Mordechai and Esther, and it's the end of Torah Shebichtav, that they were the ones who decreed Asur la'adam la'ashhot ishto sha'a achat b'lo ketubah. Basically what they were saying is like this. The Torah doesn't require you to give a ketubah. What's a ketubah? It's a prenuptial agreement. In the event that we get divorced, and it's not totally your fault, which everyone always claims anyway, but in the event that it wasn't totally her fault, or that her husband dies before her, then she inherits this amount of money, which is supposed to approximate 1 year of living expenses. Take the kids out of the picture because you have to pay for them anyway. Rent, utilities, food, clothing for a year. Then after a year, Halakhah allows both her and her husband to find another situation. So she can live with her father, she can go back to living with her brothers, with her sisters, she can find a job, or she can find a husband, but we don't pay alimony for 30 years. It doesn't work that way. Child support, yes. Child support you pay. The minhag today is you continue till the kids are at least 18, and it's nice if we can push for college too, or for yeshiva after high school. So there's no biblical obligation to give your wife a ketubah. The entire mechanism is midrabanan. Rashi explains that there's a certain aspect, like an asmachta. There's like you can find a source or a root for it in the Torah. He explains this, ironically enough, by Hagar. He says by Hagar that she was a pilegesh. So what's the definition? He says, Isha im ketubah, pilegesh b'lo ketubah. What's the definition of a pilegesh? A concubine is a wife without the contract. Like a why buy the cow situation, so to speak. So she doesn't have a ketubah. There's no guarantee, there's no insurance policy. Why did Chazal institute the ketubah in the first place? It's chaval, because today they don't really use it. The ketubah, there's Mishnah, Masechet Ketubot, that says...
Section for the woman.
Naturally. The Benot Yisrael enan hefker. Jewish girls are not objects. They're not supposed to be easy to divorce. So so she should not be easy to divorce. In other words, a couple, if you think about it, it's very anticlimactic. I always mention this when I'm officiating a wedding. Here's a husband and the wife, the chatan, the kara, they love each other, they enjoy each other's company, everything's so sweet. Then we take out this contract, and he has to pay her this, he has to pay her that. If he doesn't do this, we'll find him, we'll take the shirt off of his back. That's what it says in the ketubah. So, okay, good fences make good neighbors, as we say. It sometimes helps to have things defined. Maybe, men, because they work, parnasa, money, they're a little bit more sensitive to these things. So, hit him where it hurts, basically in the pocketbook. And if you love this woman, you're going to promise her that she will, no matter when you die, or even if you do get divorced, you're going to promise her at least 1 year insurance after that. You're not going to throw her to the street. And the custom has always been to add on top of the ketubah, we give a tosefet, so it's not just what she deserves, it's a little bit more, sometimes twice as much, sometimes more. So this is the purpose of the ketubah. The pilegesh has no such assurances. Effectively, a pilegesh, it's a disadvantaged relationship, but there are reasons, there are even places for things. I'm not making any, current, actual, modern suggestions. We'll talk about that maybe in a second anyway, but a pilegesh is not a wife. It's not necessarily a useless relationship. Why do I say this? Get there very shortly. But the difference, the effect of the material difference between a wife and a pilegesh, the wife has the insurance policy. She's the one that you're let's say, financially bound to. And if you want to dissolve the relationship, you'd have to dissolve it with a get and pay out the ketubah on the same day. So, according to the Ramban, when Chazal said it's asur for a man to even live with his wife, asur adam lachot ishto, sha'a achat b'lo ketubah, you're not allowed to remain with your wife, meaning even in the same house. We hold this way, halakha, you should know. If you happen to have signed a ketubah and the witnesses are still around, great. A couple that didn't have a ketubah for whatever reason, or a couple that had a ketubah and they lost it, Chabad and a few other communities still have the minhag that the husband would sleep outside until he actually gets a ketubah written, or has a new ketubah done. So he shouldn't be guilty of what Chazal said. You're not allowed to be with your wife in yichud, just like seclusion, let alone other things, without having written her a ketubah, because that was the nature of the takana. And according to the Ramban, that's when pilagshut, when concubinage died, because Chazal basically said, what's the purpose of the ketubah? It's to make your wife harder to divorce. And what's the purpose of the making it harder to divorce? You want the relationships to work out. You want to make sure she's taken care of. Shouldn't be hafkirut. So basically, this is what they're saying. Forget pilagshim. Even our wives were not taken care of the way we're supposed to. We need an insurance policy that she's going to be taken care of during the entire duration of the marriage, and at least 1 year after. So he explains that and Sheikh Nastagdullah basically put the kibosh on the whole concept of pilagshut, because, and this is, by the way, the same logic that Rabbeinu Gershom used when he made an edict that wasn't really accepted by everyone, but he made an edict against polygamy. Even if you have two wives and if you give them both ketubot, he felt it was apparently very difficult to fulfill all of your marital and emotional obligations to both of them. Fascinating question that was asked not by me, by Rabbi Akiva Eger, so this is approximately 200 years ago. Rabbi Akiva Eger says, we have this terrible shidduch crisis here in Rabbi Akiva Eger was the father-in-law of the Chatam Sofer. So Chatam Sofer is from Bratislava. Used to call Pressburg in German, and I believe Rabbi Akiva Eger, if he was not German or Austrian. So, B'kitzur, Rabbi Akiva Eger says, it's a terrible situation that we have here in Europe. We have lots of single girls who are very sweet and very observant and would love nothing more than to start a family. We don't have that many single guys, for whatever reason. Women outnumber men by 1 or 2%, depending on the country. That's a lot. 1% of a billion people is still nonetheless, 10 million is a lot of people. That would be like 10 million women who don't have a corresponding man. Then you have other statistical issues like men have a higher incidence of suicide, of dangerous behaviors like driving too fast, drug and alcohol abuse are more prevalent by men. I think 80% of the prison population is male and not female. So, and I wonder about statistics about homosexuality. Maybe it's just my perception of New York City, but the men seem a lot more flamboyant and maybe they're a little bit easier to notice. I don't know. On my block, it's this way. So, for a whole variety of reasons, it looks like, and by the way, you also have things like military activity, wars,
or more difficult jobs
terror
that
attacks.
people die earlier.
Rahman al-Islam, you see today. Sometimes you work-related accidents too, either handicapped or dead. So, so the statistics are a little bit difficult, and generally they don't favor the women in the sense that there are going to be more women than men. That's statistics. You can look these things up if you'd like. The question Rabbi Akiva Eger asked was basically, he said, if I had the koach, I would institute that it would be permissible for a man to take a pilegesh if he's already married, meaning he didn't want single guys to be doing this, for the purpose of procreation. Basically, in the days before in vitro fertilization, I read an article this past week. Did the Pope really say that in vitro fertilization is like an insult to God?
It can be.
Look it up. He said that about abortion. He said about a couple other things. But if I'm not mistaken, he said in vitro fertilization is like an insult to the Creator. Okay. That's pretty interesting. Anyway, what he said was that you have so many girls that end up either not getting married at all, or, God forbid, making bad decisions. And he says, even in his time, marrying goyim. There were girls that would marry goyim, even from religious families, because they wanted a family that badly. So he said, what would be a better solution than this? A pilegesh. If a man is married, he has a family, and he's able to at least help this woman live that dream of having a child, she's not going to be his wife. She's not in competition with his wife for like the number one seat, so to speak. He goes on and he says, look, the reality, it'd be better if you were to take maybe a woman who's older, so I'd take a pilegah, she was 18. You could take a pilegah, she was like having trouble finding at 35, 36, 37. Maybe she won't have that many children, if at all. Maybe now's her only chance. Maybe she's blind or handicapped or otherwise not, like, it doesn't have to be someone who makes your wife uncomfortable and feels like she's in competition with her, but as far as the procreation and the mitzvah goes, he did make such a comment. Apparently, as the rabbi of the community, he had a lot of compassion for the parents that were crying and couldn't marry their daughters off and didn't know what to do because at some point it just becomes a little bit hopeless. It's sad. It's really sad, I have to tell you honestly. We have, more often than not, lots of single girls at our table on Shabbat. It's a really depressing thing. For me, I don't know, my wife deals with it, but not a pleasant situation. So what's the solution? What do you do for the single girls? If you tell me, like Rabbeinu Gershom, that we can only have one wife, then basically what you're saying is these girls are out of the picture. What happens, according to Rabbeinu Gershom, if your wife is unable to have children? If you're unable to have children, it's one thing. If she's unable to have children, then you've basically legislated divorce for her. The only way I could have kids would be I have to find another wife, but I can't have this one at the same time. So even Rabbeinu Gershom, by the way, acknowledged, the Ashkenazim hold this way, that if you're living in a country that would permit it, it would be mutar even for an Ashkenazi to have a second wife, not even a pilegish, a second wife, for the purpose of pirah v'rivah. And again, the good advice would be a wife that doesn't necessarily make his first wife jealous, but that's already up to them to figure out. But as a solution to the single crisis, maybe not all these girls will get married. Is it better to have a child than not, or is it better to have a child from a Jewish guy than go to some sperm bank and what you find there? Find out that you had a child from someone that wasn't even the guy that you requested, because they make mistakes in these places. Don't know. I don't claim to have the solutions.
So what about the Lakewood story? That was for
that died in like a year and a half. Yeah,
that was the official reason. Was
I
to
think
solve
that was
problem?
a little bit more geared towards the notes than it was towards anything else. Like it sounded like a cheap excuse just to whatever. I don't know. It was a bad story. It's a bad story, but it was based on this concept. Like, what's the real interdiction and how can it be circumvented? It wasn't so much a function of. Rabbi Akiva brings up a very legitimate Halakhic concern, and I hate to say it. Look, again, think of yourself as a married woman. It's one thing, but what do you tell all these single girls? Because I get these questions. What should I do? I can freeze egg cells. I can, go get artificially inseminated. I mean, but none of these things are exceptionally appealing. I don't know. It's not the same relationship as husband and wife, but I guess something is better than nothing.
But there is no chiyuv of pirah v'rivah for women.
Well, chiyuv, no. She's also obligated, though, not to have inappropriate relations. You don't want to basically tell her, look, if you want to have children, it's going to be from some non-Jewish guy, because anybody who's observant is not going to be considering you. I don't know. I don't know that there are no quick and easy answers to these situations. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of single girls, like more than there probably ever was, and a lot of them just don't find. We can tell them already here, if you pass the age of 30, 35, it's like, just forget it, just quit. Because what are the chances statistically that you're going to find a guy who's divorced, a guy who's widowed, but it's really difficult. I mean, imagine you had a daughter this age, what would you do? In a lot of families, it's a very, very painful topic, but it's tough. The situation is what it is. So the legislation, if you will, the halakha, the way that we have it is that we are extremely adamant that you should get married and treat your first wife right, and hopefully no one has any issues beyond this. The question is only, what do you do with these single girls? So it's a suggestion that was made. I did mention in the past that they flexed on this a little bit during the Crusades and during some of the Muslim invasions. If a community was in need of such a thing, then they would sometimes allow a man to marry more than one woman just so that the goyim would leave her alone. So it's also better than being carried off, abducted like a Yazidi and sold on eBay.
Or in terms of war, men are dying at war.
But this is something. This was to save the women from being abducted.
Okay.
So the idea in Morocco and a lot of countries, they were.
She could either make a wife, even if she has a second wife, so people not.
I know, but I'm just adding something like, especially in terms of war. I mean, it's kind of halacha you have to use. I mean. Now, even in terms of peace, you're more women than men. So
yeah, Yeah, but again, you see clearly, look, today was another horrible example of this, but the targets of Piguim are typically men.
But I'm sure I read...
Soldiers that get killed or kidnapped, typically men. I mean, it is what it is.
I don't remember exactly the detail, but I'm sure I read something from Rabbi Shalom Messas about Pilegesh, Dafka Pilegesh, and he didn't, I mean, I have to find back the text, but he didn't seem so like clear about the fact that he was forbidden even like in the recent time. I mean, it was more like an open article. Maybe if I find back the text.
I'd be happy to see it, but I can tell you that I can't think of one precedent from anyone I've ever heard of. I can think of people who've made plenty of bad decisions and stupid things. I don't know if they were looking for the Halakhic category of Pilegesh in order to enable the behavior, but...
What was the reaction to the what's the name?
Rabbi Akiva Eger.
Yeah.
What he wrote in Aramaic was Iya Yashar Hili. It's like an expression from the Gemara that if I had the koach, I would do this.
Oh, he wasn't just proposing, like,
what he was saying, he was basically saying if I could find other rabbis to agree with me, if people would look at me as crazy, it's like it's the only solution I can think of, and it has historical precedent.
Yeah, right? But there was
even
no
being a pilegesh, like at least she would be, in a relationship with a guy, not married but not off the street, like not living out of.
There was no discussion at the time about what he's said. I mean,
I don't know at what point in his life he brought this up. It just didn't sound like something that he campaigned very hard for. It could be that he was older already and he just changed his mind, or he came to this conclusion later on in his life. But
the good part of not having you getuvah on the other end is that you don't have to fight to get your get. All the issue is.
I mean, it's an unintended consequence of the whole concept. Yeah. Well, no, but it's not. But anyway, she's married with a Rada Ketubah.
Yeah, but okay, but
a
like,
pilegesh would not be married, right? That'd be something else.
You don't have to fight to get your.
It didn't used to be that way. If we had Batidin today that had the authority, we would just beat these people up and you wouldn't have this problem. I have a problem now. They got me in this case from Crown Heights. These two Bali Teshuvah. The guy's an absolute psychopath. I mean, I'll forward you articles. There's a drug bust in Chabad. Did you hear about this last week?
No.
There's a drug bust at like a Chabad house last week. So like, this is the guy that I'm trying to get a get from.
Give him something to smoke, maybe.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. Well, he had a jar of acid, a bunch of weed, he had an assault rifle. Yeah. No, don't blame Chabad. This is like Chabad wasn't the guy's problem. At this point. Yeah, I know. It's public information, but his father's an Iranian Muslim. Imagine this.
I don't need this kind.
Yeah, his father's an Iranian Muslim, and he disowned the son who decided to become Jewish because he has drug problems and because other things. The Muslim is like, what? I know what religion is. This is crazy what you're doing. So he was in jail just now, 3 felony and 2 misdemeanor accounts.
I know who converted this guy. He's the rabbi of Washington. That's the guy of the Mikveh.
Yeah, the Mikveh rabbi, right? So, no, Hashem Elohim. But basically, it's an interesting discussion. I don't think, I'm not going to promote this anywhere, and I don't think I don't know how far it's going to go. All I can tell you is that it's very easy to be frum when it comes to halakha. It's a really good example of what's called a humra bali de kula. Like, it's impossible to be mahmir on something, to emphasize something and not de-emphasize something else. And we don't have any halakhic advice to give a single woman except for pray really hard and give more tzedakah. Otherwise, we're basically telling her, look, the rules are the rules, the laws are the laws. You can't marry a guy who's already married. We don't believe in this concept of pilakshim anymore. So not everybody's very encouraging of artificial insemination for a woman who's not married. And even if she wants to go that route, there was a massive mahloket between Rav Moshe Feinstein and the Satmar Rebbe as to whether or not it's better to take semen from a Jewish man or from a non-Jewish man, and that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, anyway, it's a mess. Long story short is it's a mess. So there are girls who do it and they don't care. They don't ask anybody for permission. But a girl who wants to be observant, basically we're telling her, no, because of the halachot the way they are, you have to stay stable. Chances are you will not get married, you will not have children, and learn to live with that. That's as much as we can do for her, which is sad. But at the same time, if it were to, I guess the logic is that if it were to be such a terrible challenge to a marriage, we would lose the core, the nuclear family, the institution of marriage, right? Then maybe it's just not worth taking a chance. Like you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, as we say. It's collateral damage of our protection of the sanctity of marriage. Don't know. Who am I? I teach. All right.
Like,
Shabbat
Back
Have a
over.
good night.
Kaffe Moti.